So I've got a blank program here. Make sure you set this situation up for me. Pause if you need to. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up some students. I'm going to put it into a two-dimensional list. Now, when you do a two-dimensional list, I'm just going to show you something before we go any further. The way that Python wants you to do it is something like this. So if I do names, remember you've got a double bracket there, and each new record is inside its own list. So I effectively end up with something like this. So what I've got now is I've got my two records here. That's record 0, that's record 1, and I can now see where James and Laura are in that record. So let's just have a little play with this. So what we're going to do is just see if we can figure out what's in position 0. And notice it now brings up record 0, so that's James's record. We can do the same thing for Laura. Let's see if we can get a bit more specific. Let's see if we can find out a little bit, if we can determine what James's age is. And we could do the same thing for Laura as well. And you can always change things a little bit if you wanted to. For example, we could change James's name to Alex. And let's just have a look at names. And now you can see that's changed. I can do the same sort of thing with appending new records. I can delete records. All the things you can do normally with lists, you can do here. So that just gives us a little bit of an idea about the direction of travel with this. Okay, so what I'm going to do is set up a student list. Now, what you're going to see is that I'm going to format it in a particular way, and this is just for human beings. It's not for Python. So what I've now got is I've got James, Alice, Risa, Sarah, Andrew, Jess, but notice I've put them in a way and laid them out so that I can see there are my rows and here are my columns, and that just makes it easier for me. Python doesn't really care. Python will always want to show you or print them out by default like that. So, but it's just a bit easier to see if what you're doing and which column and which row is which if you lay it out this way. So the first thing I want to do is to show you how we can display the list. So let's start with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to first of all display the list, and we're going to do that in 3 different ways, and later on you can choose which one is most appropriate to whichever question or whatever situation you have. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the same structuring system that we've used before, which is to create subprograms. This is just going to be a procedure, so it's not going to return any values. So I'm going to call this one display list. I'm going to use a parameter, pStudents, and one thing you can do is you can use lists as parameters. So I could send this list to this subprogram and then do whatever I want to it. So let's start off with the easiest of the print statements. And so what I'm going to do is do print pStudents. In order to make that work, all I need to do is go down to my main program, and I'm going to call the procedure, and I'm going to do that simply by giving it the name and then giving it the parameter, and then I'm going to run that, and there you can see it. Now it's not very pretty, but it does work. So let's see if we can make that a little bit better. So the next thing I want to do is to iterate through the list, and this will give me a slightly better printout. It won't be absolutely brilliant yet, but you've seen that technique before. So there's the first technique that we did. And here we've got a slightly better way of doing it, which shows us the layout in rows, still showing it in a fairly clunky list, so that's not absolutely perfect. So we've still got a little way to go. So let's try something a little bit fancier. So we're going to iterate through the list and display using a horrible word, concatenation, but all we're doing is building up a string to show it. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this for each student in P students, and I'm going to just print it out here. I'm going to start with my first column, which will be the name, give it a little bit of a message, carry on with my next column, which will be the ID. I'm running out of room on this line, so I'm just going to go to the next one. And because I put a plus in before, it will cope with that. I'm going to put a little bit more of a message. And here I've got to convert this next bit to a string because originally it's a number, so an integer. So let's just close that off. That's all worked fine. And let's just see what that does for us. There you go. So that's the first method at the top. Our second method, which still showed it as a list, but in a slightly more structured way. And our third method, which starts to make it look a little bit prettier, which starts to give us a little bit more control over what we're doing. So that's how you can display the list. The next thing we're going to have a look at is how we can format that list and display it in a much better way, making it look like a proper table. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how you can use your string formatting that you had learned earlier in the course to make a two-dimensional list look a little bit neater, to make it look like a properly formatted table. And what I've done is I've commented out the old subprogram so that it doesn't display that list over and over again, so it's a bit easier for you to see exactly what's going on. And it's just a bit of a trick you can play. You can comment things out, uncomment them. It makes life a little bit easier. And what I'd like you to do is just set up this situation in the main program and this situation in your subprogram. And once you're ready, we'll start to build our formatted list. So the first thing I'm going to do is something that hopefully you're familiar with, which is to create a string layout variable. And what I'm going to also do is give myself a heading or a line of characters which will run along the top and hopefully will give me, there we are, the top line of my table. And that's something I can use over and over again once I've got it right. The next thing I want to do is to create the layout variable and use the layout variable rather. So I'm going to do layout equals, and I'm going to use in true Blue Peter fashion one I created earlier. So here it is. So you might need to set that up. And now what I'm going to do is just add on 2 more lines just to finish this little section. There we are. And what we've now got is we have got our top and our bottom equals line of equal signs. We've got our layout template, which we're using. So left aligned 15 characters, center aligned 10 characters, right aligned 3 characters, with those funny pipe symbols. And remember, you've got those funny squiggly brackets without spaces in them to create that situation. So let's just see what that does. So there we go. So that's the top bit of our table done. And now what we're going to do is a very similar trick as to what you saw before with iteration. So what we're going to do is we're going to iterate through this list. So some of this will be exactly the same, but now we're going to print it out using a bit of layout technique. So what I need to do is to grab myself my first few bits of code. So now what I've got is the same size of columns, so 10, 3, 15, but my last one here is an integer number, so remember it's got that funny thing about being an integer decimal, so so I formatted that as a D so it prints it out properly. Now one little thing here is because in a two-dimensional list, in a row, you're accessing different columns, so column 0, column 1, column 2, we can use that in our iteration. We already used it here, so you can see that happening there and there. But let's use it here, and we're going to use it using the print layout. And this looks a little bit different from the print layout you were doing before. So let's just pop that in. Again, stop the video, pause it, and just make sure that you're trying this out and making sure you get the code correct for me. And then I'm going to finish the whole thing off with the same set of equal characters there. I'm going to run that through, adjust my screen so you can see it, and there you've got a properly formatted list. It's all lined up. That takes a little bit of playing around with, a little bit of practice, but it's quite straightforward to do, and it's using that ability of Python to iterate through a list and also to access different columns of a two-dimensional list.